Okay, America's Elite 5, 6, 7, 8, backup slate.
Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
G.I.Joe, the very best. America's Elite. Eliter than all the rest. Trained to have no flaws. Defending liberty across the land. Valor oversized. Bring out that big brass band. Real heroes verified. G.I.Joe. Gotta read them all, you must agree. Elitist in history. G.I. Joe. Oh, there can be no end. In a world we must defend. G.I. Joe. Gotta read them a courageous crew. Their colors red, white, and blue. Mess with them and they'll shoot you. G.I. Joe. Gotta read them all. Gotta read them all.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated G.I. Joe comics podcast. Now, if you are new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website. That website is talkingjoe.co.uk. Today, we are continuing our look at the Disavowed era with G.I. Joe Americas Elite issues 5 through to 8. These were published by Devil's Due, November 2005 to February 2006. Crikey. 5 years in now. And this is the continuation of the Joe Casey run with the concluding issues from Stefano Caselli on interiors. For those reading along in collected editions, this is collected across the 2006 editions from Devil's Due, America's Elite Trade Paperback 1, The Newest War, which covers 0 to 5, and Volume 2, Ties That Bind, which covers 6 through 12, and the reprinted IDW versions, America's Elite Volume 1, which had 0 through 6, and Volume 2, which had 7 through 12. Now, without further ado, Reet Petite, the elitist co-host you ever want to meet. It's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners.
How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing well. One of these issues on the inside back cover, in fact, has a thank you. The inside back cover at issue 7 that we're talking about in this episode has a thank you letter from. It's a from all of us at Devil's Due Publishing. Thank you for 5 years, and then it's signed by all the staff, and it I think it is a Photoshop job, but it's meant to look like a piece of paper with print and then signatures on a wooden desktop.
Indeed, so, yeah. Devil's Due would like to thank us for supporting them over the past 5 years. So, actually, a footnote to our coverage of these issues 5 through 8. Is that in the back of these issues, back of issue 5 and back of issue 6, there is a backup story called The Past Comes Back, which is written by Josh Blaylock, all about Zartan, and that's why Zartan features on the front cover. We will cover that another episode because it is sort of running to the side of this main story, and so for our laser focus, we're going to focus on the Joe Casey written issues here, but we will circle back to those. Don't you worry. Now, Tim, you may be interested to know that on the Facebook page, I asked our listeners what they remembered thinking about the launch of the America's Elite series back in the day, and I was inundated with answer. Just joking. I was inundated with 3 responses. So Bart Simon had this to say. Let me see if I can put my best Bart voice on. Don't have a cow, dude. No, wrong Bart. I was hoping it would be better than what we had before. It kind of started that way, but got stale fast. And Sam Sears said, While I liked Joe Casey's other work, it seemed obvious that he hadn't read what Joe was writing. I didn't want to see the stools dropped. That is referring to the Stool brothers, not any sort of toilet humour there. And I already thought that killing Lady J was the wrong call. The new uniforms looked terrible in design, despite having some awesome art. We also got a voicemail in from Rusty Shackelford, who had this to say.
Hey, Mark. Hey, Tim. This is Rusty from San Francisco. I love the podcast, and I really appreciate the work you guys put into it. Regarding America's Elite, it's a series that I didn't pick up when it first came out. And I'm not even sure if I knew it was coming out. I'd gotten out of collecting comics for a little while. And then once I got older and my life kind of stabilized again, I went back and filled in the holes in my collection. And I'm sure I've read them and probably read them not too long ago, but I really don't remember much about them. But you guys always have such good insights that I'm really looking forward to cracking open my magazines and reading along with the podcast. Thanks so much again for your time. Hope you guys are well, and I can't wait to hear the next episode.
Thank you, Rusty. Good to hear from a listener that we've not heard from before, I think. So if, like Rusty, you want to send us a voice note, you can find that facility via the website, talkingjoe.co.uk. Scroll to the bottom and you can leave us a voice message letting us know what you think of the issues as we're reading them, or indeed what you think of the job we are doing. All positive messages will be kept and included. So, Tim, let's talk about the issues at hand. The creative team, we've got more from Joe Casey as the writer. Art is Stefano Caselli, apart from issue 5, which is Nelson Blake II and John Lowe on inks for that issue 5. And I think we might also have some sneaky uncredited assistants in the interiors as well. Maybe we'll talk about that later. The colours are a mixture here. We've got Kendrik Lim of ILS on 5 and 6 and 7, and Daniele Rudoni on 8. Lettering is from Steve Seeley and Brian J. Crowley, and it is all edited by Mike O'Sullivan.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Okay, Tim, it feels like we're in a privileged position of having just one cover per issue on these, which makes for a much simpler review of them. Do you want to talk us through the covers and your thoughts on them?
Sure. I want to just point out that I think the cover to issue 5 is a colorist Dave McKeag's first and maybe only G.I. Joe contribution. Dave McKeag has the distinguishment of being my favorite color artist in comics.
Oh, wow.
And he is known these days for coloring The Walking Dead as the twice monthly Walking Dead Deluxe. He colored a really great year on New Avengers around Secret Invasion when he was coloring Francis Lennell Yu's art on that book in, 2008. I first noticed him in comics coloring some Darth Maul for Dark Horse. He colored Lowe for Rick Remender and Greg Ticini at Image. And he has worked for all the publishers. He's worked for on various Image books. He's done some Marvel stuff, and sometimes it's sort of random. If you are Jonathan Hickman Fantastic Four fans, if you remember the cover to the first Hickman issue of Fantastic Four, which is an Alan Davis drawing, Dave McKeag colored that cover. And I think he colored Superman Birthright, which was that 12 issue. Anyway, I'm spending a lot of time on... I'm very good at picking out his work. When I'm looking at a catalog and I see covers very, very small nowadays, I will smile and say, hey, that's Dave McKeag. And I didn't realize this was him coloring the cover to issue 5 until I looked at the credits. And now that I know that, I can kind of see it. But anyway, okay, the cover to issue 5 is a moody scene of menace and danger between Zartan and Storm Shadow in the swampy woods. And I'm gonna bring out two examples in today's episode to follow up on a comment I made in a previous episode where I said Stefano Caselli's art is wonderful. I find some of his panel compositions are weak or awkward, and this covered issue 5 is one of my two examples for that, where I think the negative space is important because you need a sense of the trees and the sort of light coming in. But this cover is so vertical and it's so bisected, right? It's not like literally halfway on the left is Zartan and tree and halfway on the right is everything else, but it's pretty close. Zartan's arm is sort of following the same vertical of the tree, and sort of Zartan's like standing angle matches Storm Shadow's standing angle. So I really want something to be diagonally from bottom left to top right, like in a northeasterly direction. Anyway, so good cover, not a great cover.
The thing that I noticed about issue 5 was, in part because of the way I've got these bound with the into a custom binding, is that the preview of next issue in the back of issue 4 versus the published cover on issue 5 is that it has been flipped as a mirror image. So in the sort of the initial preview, Zartan is on the right of the image, whereas here he's on the left. And,
interesting.
So I wonder how it was drawn originally.
Yeah, I think whether it's left right or right left, I think the compositional issues are still there, but that's a fun detail. Thank you for. It's
also got a crop on it. Actually, looking at it as well, the published version for 5 is significantly zoomed in versus the previous one.
I'm going to come back to that. Okay, the cover to issue 6 is a wraparound cover, and I'm a big fan of wraparound covers because you get more bang for your buck. It means the publisher can't put an ad, whether it's for them or they're actually selling that space for some outside product, on the back cover. This wraparound cover is previewed on the last page of issue 5, and I think it looks better when it's very small because Caselli has drawn a very cool, muscular, tight clothinged, attitudey Snake Eyes, and you can't see it, but the way that he's holding his sword with his left hand, the one that's cropped, must be very cool because of how the angle of the sword comes back in. So Snake Eyes looks great on the back cover. Destro looks good. He is cropped at the wrist, which, if I'm remembering my Bart Sears Brute and Babe How to Draw Comics articles from Wizard magazine in the 90s, is a no-no. But also, to listener Bart's comments, I don't love this costume for Destro, but I talked about costumes a lot in a previous episode. The thing that doesn't work about this cover for me is that Scarlet, it's a little hard to tell who it is, because though she has red hair and sort of a yellowish costume, she's knocked back with sort of some translucent aqua, as if she's underwater too, the way that this background is underwater, the way that they're not actually in front of a giant window or like portal, on the submarine. This cover is something of a montage, but the effect here is they're all sort of in the water. And since her hair doesn't quite read as red and her uniform doesn't quite read as yellow, she only kind of reads as Scarlet. But the thing that really jumps out for me is that she was drawn at a smaller size and blown up in, let's say, Photoshop. And so I start to see a lot of sort of scratchiness in her eyelashes and that one strand of hair over her eye on the back cover. And, this is certainly like a good graphical solution, resizing things. But when there's an inconsistency and something is definitely shrunk or enlarged, it starts to look like it's following different rules for me, and it's distracting. So I do like the idea of this cover, but
yeah, if I was hazard a guess, all three of these characters were probably drawn independently and then photoshopped together. So there's probably a version of that Destro and Snake Eyes where you see their full extremities of their both hands.
Yeah.
And this is a double-sized spectacular as advertised on the front with this wraparound cover. Tim, why do you think they would single out issue 6 of America's Elite as being a special?
Well, we need to go to the previous issue, because issue 5 is also double-sized. And on the bottom of the cover, above the UPC barcode,
Oh, yes.
it says 48 pages. And so this was actually sort of, I thought, maybe our second topic that we would get to after the covers, because the fact that issues 5 and 6 are both double-sized is its own note of interest. So you want to talk about the double-sized thing, or should I roll my eyes at the cover to 7?
We can talk about the nature of the double-sizedness in a bit, but I was just going to speculate that I think possibly the reason they've done it is that we had 43 issues of the G.I. Joe title pre-launch. We had an issue 0 and then 6 more issues, which, if you do the maths, adds up to 50. So this is issue 50 of the unnumbered G.I. Joe from Devil's Due.
Interesting, the legacy numbering, to use that term that Marvel and maybe DC use these days. I hadn't thought of it that way.
It might be a coincidence, but that would be my speculation at any rate.
Well, we're in it, so we'll just talk about this topic, and then I'll roll my eyes at the cover to 7. Blaylock writes the backup in 5 and 6, and so this is sort of this is an open question, because we noted that Blaylock was involved in some of the Brandon Jurwa stories in the second half of the Brandon Jurwa run. So is Blaylock sort of flexing his muscles as publisher? And this is certainly a smoother way of doing it, that Joe Casey can keep writing his own story in the front of the book, and that's why people are buying it. And Blaylock wants to do something with Dreadnoks because he likes Dreadnoks. I also wondered, does this have to do with the 5-year anniversary, that they're sort of the publisher, not Blaylock as the sort of positioned publisher, but Devil's Due as the company? Or is it flexing its muscles the way that, you get to issue 25 or, 25th anniversary and you do a special? It is remarkable to me that a comic would have, sort of for no immediately obvious reason, a double-sized issue at issue 5 or a double-sized issue at issue 6, and then both. I think that's great. I've said jokingly and seriously, I want G.I. Joe to be published twice a month, and I want double-sized issues, and I want special one-shots and side miniseries. So I think at the time I was thinking, all other things being equal, oh, cool. I think at the time this was where I was starting to I was thinking about stepping away from this series again. So these double-sized issues weren't enough to keep me. But it's every time you do a double-sized issue, I think the editor or the publisher worries that the higher cover price will keep a few people away. And if someone was looking for a reason to jump off, they will. And certainly crossovers, issue number 1s, anniversary issues, Wolverine 50, by Larry Hama and Mark Silvestri with like a cover enhancement, or, that's from the 90s, or Action Comics 1000 from a couple years ago, with like 10 variant covers, and it's a $10 comic, and it's like triple or quadruple sized, and that's a big deal. A lot of people swoop in to sample that. Who's going to swoop in to sample the G.I. Joe relaunch 5 months in? It's like, oh, this is $4.50. So I think it's cool. I think it's weird. I think it's risky. All right, covered issue 7. I don't know who this is. I think it's Shipwreck, but I actually... Ooh. Is it Roadblock?
I don't know. When I was looking at it, I was thinking Roadblock, but now you say Shipwreck, I'm not so sure.
Doesn't the facial hair more match Shipwreck?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so this cover, there's a Joe in scuba gear, but it's not wetsuit or torpedo. So even though this person has facial hair, so it could only be half the Joes, in effect, it could be anyone. Okay, so they're turning at us because there's something looming. So there's this big hand that's taking up the bottom 40% of the cover. And it's sort of robotic because it's got screws where the knuckles are. And it's purple and blue. And it's sort of reaching at the Joe's shoulder, but not actually touching because it seems like it hasn't made contact yet. And then the Joe's hand is also, this is sort of the bottom right of the corner, is sort of up and reacting. And then in a reflection on the Joe's clear face mask is sort of a very small, menacing head silhouette with two glowing eyes. So I think that's, quote, us. That's the character that's grabbing for Roadblock or Shipwreck. And then behind Roadblock or Shipwreck are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus a few more that you can't quite see. Sort of slightly out of focus, hazy. They've been knocked back with atmospheric perspective. There's blue mixed in, so they look further away. I know I've read the story, so I know that it's these robot Iron Grenadiers based on their silhouettes. But this cover, to me, has always been unsatisfying because the menacing hand that's coming in isn't quite grabbing. It's not like it's holding on to the air hose. It's not like it's tugged out the air hose. It's not like it's holding a weapon. It's not like it's a fist. It's not like it's grabbing with like sharp, fingertip spikes or anything. It's grabbing, but it hasn't grabbed. And so as a menacing sort of anatomical prop hand, it's sort of like 60% of the way there. Again, I don't know which Joe this is. And then the background characters are underdrawn, or they've been drawn a certain way, and then the coloring is sort of over. Anyway, I find this cover overall to be underdrawn and underconsidered. And it's too bad because if you spelled this out for me in a sentence, or it's 3 bullet points, like underwater, Joe reacting in surprise, we're the villain, other villains looming in the background, I'd say, oh, that's awesome. But the elements do not come together. And it's too bad because maybe my favorite kind of Joe cover is like, heightened moment of Joe in danger, or, like bursting out at ya. The cover to 48, whenever I see it, I always go, oh, I always wince a little because Zartan looks so in control and evil, and the tension with his head and his eyes and his body and his neck and Gung-Ho's face and Gung-Ho's hand and the angle, like the whole thing's at a Dutch angle, right? The walls behind them are not straight up and down. And so these two covers, Stefano Caselli, Americas Elite 7, Mike Zeck, G.I. Joe, Real American Hero 48, they're not in equal comparison, but there's actually a lot in common, and one of them punches me in the gut a lot more.
Did you notice, Tim, on the inside front cover, the credits that were noted for this cover to number 7?
Stefano Caselli and IFS. Oh, graphic design by Evan Salt, assistance by Sean Dove. Tim Seeley lent a hand to the cover. That feels like an inside joke, like Tim Seeley posed his hand and someone took a photo of it for Stefano Caselli to draw. That's my guess on that one.
Memories are hazy, but the thought, as per the After Action Report Volume 2, which is an excellent resource for all things Devil's Due, the thought is that Tim Seeley actually drew the hand for this. So my guess is that they felt that somehow the original version was lacking something a little, and that grabbing hand might just add in a little bit more drama. And so Tim Seeley is the staff, art, this director, artist guy.
Or did he do the layout? Because that hand looks like a Stefano Caselli hand. Doesn't look like a Tim Seeley hand, to the extent that I can differentiate their styles. I would defer to hazy recollections in After Action Report. The cover to issue 8, as with the cover to to 5, the cover to issue 8 is also cropped and zoomed in. You can see a fuller body version of the cover to issue 8, which is a white background with Storm Shadow looking badass, just standing there. Oh, on the back cover to 7, you see all the way down to his hands and sort of his mid-thigh. And the actual cover to 8 has been zoomed in and cropped, so it's just head and shoulders, chest, and some of his abdomen. And oh hey, It's that sword that you can order. Remember that? Was it in America's Elite Zero, the 25-cent issue? There was an ad for this company that was making a prop Snake Eyes and a prop Storm Shadow sword, and you sent me a Hiss Tank link to an old thread where someone had pulled a couple photos from an old, or maybe then concurrent eBay listing. And I'm jumping ahead here, but when Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are fighting in this story, they're using those two swords.
Yeah, from it was on issue 0, the back
cover. Okay.
Atlanta Cutlery. And interestingly, actually, in the preview image on the back cover, he's holding the sword, and on the zoomed published front cover, it's on his back.
Oh, right, interesting. Yeah. So they must have thought, well, if it's him and there's no sword on the cover to 8, Tim Finn will think that it's Arctic Firefly, because Tim is always getting confused with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and Firefly costumes when it's like in the shadows. But if we put a sword there, Tim Finn will definitely know that it's Storm Shadow, especially if it's the sword that fans. Okay, that was a joke. Okay. Anyway, so the cover to 8, it's okay. It's a cool drawing. The zoom in and crop doesn't do any damage to it. It's not like so zoomed in that the lines are getting really, really scratchy. The white background that sort of overwhelms any outer outlines on Storm Shadow is really dramatic. It feels like he's standing in front of, like the sun in the Arctic Circle, or like a very, very bright computer screen. So we've got a little bit of this whiteout effect, and yet the front of him is not all in shadow. So he's front lit and he's backlit. As a cover that makes me want to buy the issue, yes. As a cover that makes me want to buy the issue and is teasing the contents, no, because it's just a cool guy standing there.
True.
And if I want that, I'll buy any Marvel comic published between 2001 and 2004.
I just noticed across these 4 issues covers as well that on none of them the Joes are brandishing weapons or guns. In fact. So to talk to that point that Hasbro were pushing back on guns appearing on the covers, for these 4 issues, certainly that seems to be borne out. Okay, let's remind ourselves of the story of these 4 issues, shall we, with a plot breakdown.
Plot breakdown.
In the aftermath of the defeat of Vance Wingfield, the Joe team is in disarray. Duke is missing on a mysterious mission in South America. Scarlet is missing too, held captive on Destro's submarine. Flint is in a emo pit of grief. Shipwreck is suspicious of Storm Shadow, and Stalker is getting grief of his own, this time from Colton, who doesn't have any confidence in his team and is more than willing to give them a good shouting. Scarlet has got some secret trackers implanted under her skin, and she's been traced back to an empty patch of ocean. Unfortunately, the president says that a rescue mission is a no-go from those Yo-Joes. So the Joes take some leave for an unofficial independent operation. They get on a bus and go to Spring... Oh no, hold on. Wait, wrong comic. Alexander, aka Destro Jr., attempts to kill the imprisoned Scarlet, who breaks free just as the Joe team arrive to rescue her. As they are overwhelmed, Destro sets a self-destruct sequence for his submarine. In the bow, where water has begun flooding in, Snake Eyes traps himself using a manual lever to seal the doors. Later, at a Japanese naval base, a seemingly deceased Snake Eyes is laid out on a slab, and fingers are pointed as to where the mission went so wrong. Scarlet cries, and Flint gives some really encouraging words of consolation. Kamakura arrives, hoping that Snake Eyes has cheated death, using the Sleeping Phoenix technique. Could these suspicions be right when they find that his body is missing? And elsewhere, in the Amazon, Duke finds a giant industrial complex defended by some junky bats. He says to them, "Take me to your leader." So, there we go. Lots of stuff happening and condensed into that plot briefing. I feel like for this one, maybe before we get too far deep into things, let's make sure that we say something nice.
Well, I done read a heck a lot of comics. Some of them are great, the team are all on it, but some are a bit cack. They really are whack. Before the nitpicks come out, I'll giving it my bestest, and nothing's gonna stop me from trying to be positive. So I'll pause my scorn to put up 2 thumbs and turn my frown upside down. Take advice, it cannot wait. Say something nice. I'll say something nice.
Have you got something nice to say about these 4 issues?
Yeah, Caselli's art is still really sexy and exciting and modern in a way that G.I. Joe comics hadn't had. There's a heft to how he draws people, their faces, their bodies, their hands, their lips, their costumes, their poses. So even though I have sometimes some complaints about aspects of his work, it's like meaty and sexy. And for sort of the superhero take, or the broader action take on G.I. Joe, I think Casey makes a really exciting story. I think you and I will get into why it may not work for us as Joe fans, but I think I can see, if I wasn't a Joe fan, or if I liked G.I. Joe but sort of hadn't read the comics, if someone handed me America's Elite, and the letters page somewhat bears this out. There's some excited people writing into the letters page. I think I would find these to be really exciting comics.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I mean, Stefano Caselli does a great job, and some of those action sequences he does, and particularly, as you pointed to before, the expressions on their faces is very exciting. It is, does feel like a big blockbuster action film in parts. A lot of high drama. Having the smaller cast, definitely does allow for the writer to zoom in and explore that cast in a little bit more detail. Each one of the cast members has got something going on, and you can't necessarily say that an awful lot of times about G.I. Joe comics because of the size of the cast. A lot of times people are just relegated somewhat to the background, or if they are indeed used at all.
I'll say one more nice thing if you're done.
Yeah.
For having a fill-in artist this soon into the series, Nelson Blake II does a great job. His stuff, it doesn't have sort of quite the same like heaviness and thickness and roundness and sexiness of Caselli, but his whole issue 5, it looks good. He's a pretty good match, and with all the artists out there with all the different styles. He's not similar to Caselli, but he's more similar than dissimilar, and he does a great job on his issue. So while I'm always disappointed by fill-ins during a beloved artist's run, a fill-in sort of quote too soon, I think editorial did a good job picking him. And if I can transition into talking about him for a moment, I can give a tiny bit of additional info on him.
Yeah, let's do it. That was actually going to be, if I was going to make a second say something nice, I was said something almost identical to what you were going to say, Tim. The reason I didn't was because I was going to say I think he did a decent job as a fill-in artist. I was expecting the reply to be no. He's awful. What are you talking about? And then we'd start getting in a whole different direction. So I'm glad that.
So the question I had when I I sit down to read these 4 issues, and I'm not reading issue 5 moments after reading issue 4. That was for a previous episode. That was, some weeks ago. And so I was coming into G.I. Joe kind of fresh, having not read G.I. Joe for a while. And I thought, I wonder what would have happened if Blake had drawn the whole series. It's like if Caselli was only going to stick around for 8 issues over 9 months, it's like if he wasn't going to stick around, to the extent that one would want a longer run by an artist who could stick around for longer, how would I have felt? How would everyone have felt if it had only been Nelson Blake II from the beginning? And maybe issue 0 and 1 wouldn't have hit with the same exciting and sexy punch. But, he can do the work. It is not as exciting, but issue 5 looks good. I don't know if it looks amazing, but it looks good.
And we will be seeing more of him from issue 9 onwards. So it's not the last we've seen of Nelson Blake.
Right. Nelson Blake has been at several places in comics the last 10, 15 years. He drew the 2017 Luke Cage series for Marvel. It was written by David F. Walker. He drew a Miles Morales Spider-Man annual in 2018. He drew a creator-owned series. I'm pretty sure it's creator-owned at Image in 2016 called Romulus. And he's done, smaller projects and short stories or fill-ins here and there as well. And as you say, he'll come back to the world of G.I. Joe. Caselli uses a lot of medium and thick lines, both as exterior outlines and also just sort of anywhere there's a line. Caselli will pencil and ink thick lines. And Nelson is drawing with almost exclusively thin lines. But, his acting is good and his compositions are good. Everything's clear.
I'd say sort of flicking between the two, much more sort of, I don't know, grounded, almost sort of slightly more realistic in some ways, whereas Caselli is sort of more in the superhero vein where everyone is very muscular, everything is very dramatic.
Caselli is exaggerating more. And if I was to make a comparison to the other long-running G.I. Joe series, I might say that what Nelson Blake II is doing for his G.I. Joe is more akin to what Shannon Gallant does with his 90-some issues of G.I. Joe at IDW, where his storytelling is sort of old-fashioned and clear. There's a lot of sort of, I don't want to say straight-on shots, but he's very aware of sort of the up and down and left and right of the rectangle as a panel, as a compositional element. And Stefano Caselli, his art is more exaggerated, and he's dealing more with sort of curves and rounded shapes and like twisting of torsos, and feels a little bit more like, Phil Gosier, who drew the final like 10 months of G.I. Joe at Marvel, where that is more superhero influenced.
I'll just linger on a particular story point, if you will, Tim, which was, we talked about like the clarity of Nelson Blake's art, and there was a moment for me that was relatively confusing, and this was the transition to the Baroness flashback, which for me sort of didn't start off well because there isn't anything that immediately tells us it's a flashback until at the end of the sequence she wakes up with a no, realizing it's all a dream or a memory. So the transition into the sequence is a little bit confusing. Is it present day? It doesn't have like the rounded corners or the different coloring or an introduction which tells us where we are. And the Baroness is getting into a night raven through the back, and once she's in the back it kind of looks a little bit like a factory or something. Doesn't necessarily make you think, oh yeah, that's definitely the back of a plane. It takes off, the engines boom, and she falls over. There's a message from Cobra Commander that seems to be pre-recorded and talking about the remote control plane, which is going to explode. And she climbs a ladder, I think, and I believe that what she's doing is actually climbing from the back of the Night Raven up this ladder to the secondary kind of vehicle.
The drone that
The
sits on top
drone.
of it?
Yes. Is it called the drone?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know what? This is not presented clearly. Right, because on page 9, the second page of this 2-page Baroness scene, in panel 3, now that you said all this, I realize what's happening on the left is the Night Raven is exploding and the drone is getting away and twisting, spinning. But I actually sort of thought it was, like when Spider-Man's like swinging, sometimes an artist draws him 3 times, in different moments of the movement, like an animator would. And the final one might be drawn and colored like fully opaque, but the other 2 are with thinner lines, or they're sort of transparent, or they're just white. I sort of thought that's what was happening here. I sort of thought, oh, the Raven is on the left and it's also shooting forward on the right. But you are correct. That's not the Raven. That's the drone. If this is the Night Raven, which is a signature Cobra vehicle that has a second vehicle on it, this doesn't look like any Night Raven we've ever seen. And my knowledge of the toy line around 2005 is not great. But I'm pretty sure that they didn't, A, re-release the Night Raven, B, make a new thing and call it the Night Raven that still had a secondary vehicle. And yes, you're right. On page 8, panel 3, when the Baroness is walking through what looks like a factory or like a Cobra base, you don't get the sense that she's inside any kind of plane.
And this is the sequence. This is kind of looking at the sequence from issue 39, where Baroness is originally seen to be blowing up in what is more clearly a Night Raven in that sequence. So that helps. That was kind of the thing that informed me as to this is a Night Raven, and therefore that's the drone on top. It was only really when I looked back at that how it was shown in issue 39 that made me join the dots, actually. And there's another weird thing, which is where on the very first panel of this sequence, there's 2 people walking towards the plane, which is meant to be Baroness, and the clothes peg person there is meant to be Wraith. She's talking to him. James is in accursed pride. Doesn't he realize we don't need this? Wraith, where are you? And he's disappeared. And it's not clear at all as to where he's gone, why he's gone. And
right.
I don't know that it's picked up anywhere else.
Right. The scene's trying to have it both ways, where this is supposed to be a surprise to the reader. We're not supposed to know that this is an imaginary scene, that this is a nightmare. We're supposed to think that this is real and not a flashback, that this is just happening. We're supposed to think, oh, wait, the Baroness has escaped? Oh, I got to keep reading to see what happens. Because if Joe Casey wanted to inform us that this was some kind of nightmare or flashback, there would be something like there'd be a caption, 2 weeks ago, or the art style would be, or the coloring, or as you say, the corners on the panels would be rounded, which is the symbol for flashback that not everyone in comics uses. There'd be some kind of, tip. And I think this is one of those cases where, people making comics are sort of thinking of movies and TV, where you have additional cues, like, it's like, Mark, right now you're sitting in your room with some G.I.Joe books behind you. You've got headphones on, you're talking to a microphone. If this was a film or an episode of a show, and this needed to start to turn nightmarish, I could do things with the music. I could do things with the color. I could start to tilt or rotate the camera, or I could pull the camera back and zoom it in at the same time, which creates the quote Hitchcock effect, where the background behind you starts to telescope, or the books are going to push out individually like they're haunted. I could do all these things,
my voice starts to turn.
Right? As the camera's tipping toward you and there's an orange underlight on you and you're like, Tim? And then you hear fanciful carousel music, or a little girl singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, right? And it goes out of tune. But nothing about this scene except for the hard sort of cut of no, dream. And you don't have all the sound of the explosion and her screaming sort of stops or echoes or continues or crossfades or echoes in the prison, even though it's not a real sound that she'd be hearing in the prison. So yes, Nelson Blake II does a good job drawing this issue. But this scene, the plane is weird. And I think he and Joe Casey aren't using all the tools available to make this scene clear.
And back in issue 39, Destro sends Wraith and Baroness away before he faces Cobra Commander. He says, Wraith, the information you delivered has brought us a great victory, but I have another task.
Take the Baroness with you and don't let anything keep you from leaving. Protect her, Wraith. Do whatever it takes.
So I guess the expectation is that Wraith and Baroness went away together, both blew up in the plane. And here it's showing that they did go away, but only Baroness got on the plane and blew up, and something else happened to Wraith. So I guess there's probably still a mystery as to why Wraith didn't get on that plane, and how he's been able to reconcile with Destro that fact.
Can we put a pin in that? Because there is a scene where Destro is disappointed in Wraith in these 4 issues, but it doesn't go as far as explaining where Wraith went, how he knew not to get on the plane, if Destro feels like, besides the sort of layer of, you were supposed to protect my wife, you didn't. It's like, wait, did you get away and you should have been able to warn her too? I'm really angry at you. So let's put a pin in that in case later in the Joe Casey run there's a Wraith explanation or flashback.
Can I talk about the dialogue of that scene just while we're talking about it now?
Yeah, tell our listeners in which of these 4 issues is that scene?
It was...
it's in issue 6, page 156. Page
so
6.
it's a good little bit of back and forth, and it's somewhat it did sort of strike a chord with me for not necessarily the right reason. Destro says,
You have much to answer for. This is why you remain in my employ. You may have a reputation, Wraith, but your value these days has more to do with that prototype stealth assault suit. However, to me, you are simply the man charged with the protection of my wife, a task that you have failed.
My only failure, one I regret. I've told you before, it won't happen again.
Of course not. Most of us are only allowed one death.
And in reading that, just made me think, you've been given a bit of a scolding there, Wraith. He's told that you were the man responsible for protecting Destro's wife. He thinks she's dead, and he's sort of keeping you on almost as repentance for the failure of that and to make it up. And he said that you failed to keep my wife alive, and he said it won't happen again. That is not a good comeback.
I'm not convinced that Destro would keep him around. I feel like Destro should be so angry or distraught that he would decidedly, physically punish Wraith. Or, if it's the suit that's so valuable, wouldn't Destro separate the guy inside the suit from the suit? It's not like, G.I.Joe has a history of this, where there's an important technical suit, someone's wandering around in it for 30 issues and no one knows it's them. I think it's the other guy.
Anybody could be in that suit.
So I feel like this scene doesn't hit the right note. That either Destro should react differently to this failure, or there should be a better reason why he has to keep Wraith. Like, for example, Destro, you can't get rid of me. The suit is keyed to my DNA and won't work for anyone else. Or Destro, I'm your other distant cousin. Like, you kept Darklon and you're mad at him, or something like that. Or Destro, I've got $1 million of yours in a bag hidden somewhere, and I won't give it back to you unless you let me stay. And Destro, so
yeah, and at this point in time, Destro is meant to think the Baroness is dead. There's nothing to indicate that he thinks she's anything but dead, and seems to be acting somewhat unhinged and out of character. And part of my quibble about this sort of grander arc is how Destro is acting, and he's acting so differently. I guess the no prize is that he's in grief and in madness, and is acting out and lashing out at the world because he believes his wife to be dead. I think that personally, I'm not too sure that rings quite right for me for the character. That there's been so much about Destro and hit this sort of strange code of honor that he seems to act with, and the way that he behaves with Scarlet, and the way that he's worked with Wingfield to launch attacks that have killed many civilians into 2 cities, makes me think, would the Destro that I know have anything to do with an activity like that? I feel not.
Yeah, I agree. I don't agree with how Destro is handled in this arc. And should we do broader topics, or do you want to go to sort of issue by issue?
Let's go broader, but let's just one last specific, which is in this same area. There was a part in issue 5 where Destro is talking in the room where Scarlet is being held captive, and I've just found this moment very weird, and the dialogue from Destro very weird. He's looking at Scarlet sort of tied up, and he says,
"So many options here, so many ways to soothe my turmoil. I don't know where to begin."
Then he says later on,
"I will not be denied what is rightfully mine."
And just that moment just sort of came across as being a little bit pervy, a little bit creepy. Is he insinuating that he's going to have his way with this captive Scarlet? Did you take that?
Yeah.
Did you take that same meaning?
Yes. I think part of what we're reacting to is the dialogue, and also the 2/3 page splash on the page turn. So you turn the page to 13, and Scarlet, she's not like sitting fully clothed in a jail cell. She's sort of in this like Vitruvian man position. And like, yes, she's locked up. Yes, she's her ankles and her wrists are shackled, but she has a bare midriff for some reason. And I can't remember sort of what her costume was when she went missing in a previous issue. So she's barefooted and she's not wearing gloves. Like, okay. And she's got a bare midriff. And then there are those 3 little things that doctors put on your chest when you're running on a treadmill for your annual physical. I don't know. I've only seen that on TV, or when Arnold Schwarzenegger, when you're Draco in Rocky 4 and you're training or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, Scarlet's pose here is too sexy for someone who is imprisoned. And this scene comes across as too much male gaze. So you have this helpless woman who is an attractive woman, right? Like, everyone knows that Scarlet is an attractive character in the G.I.Joe universe, right? Baroness is attractive, and she's got a bare midriff, and she's wearing tight clothes, and she's her arms and legs are splayed. And so the visual here is, whether on purpose or not, suggestive. And one of the counters here is, it's like, well, the reader is going to bring their own baggage to this. And that is often true, but 2 out of 2 Talking Joe readers had a similar reaction to this scene, which is a very small sampling. And you could have Scarlet in other clothes in a different position with her, like hands or wrists shackled in other ways. You could just think if she were in the brainwave scanner, or think of how the Baroness is portrayed in her imprisonment just a couple pages earlier. She's in like a full orange prison jumpsuit, and she's like, there's nothing sexy about Baroness waking up and then being in a bed in a jail cell. So yes, I think this scene with Destro and the Baroness hits the wrong note for several reasons, and they all add up to being like disconcerting or distracting, because what's really going on here is Destro is so angry. Scarlet is awake, and he and Alexander don't know it. Like, what we're supposed to be enjoying here is this expert hero or heroine who is probably going to get out because, she's got a hair clip, that she's going to pick the lock with, or she's going to kick a viper in the face. And, yes, I don't love this scene. All right. So my comment for issue 5 overall is that it feels very much like a comic from 2005, 2006. And it doesn't feel like a Larry Hama G.I. Joe comic. And now that I've read a lot of Blaylock and Jurwa G.I. Joe comics, it doesn't feel like... I don't have a great handle on how to describe those, but I certainly know when it's not them. So issue 5 has this just pages and pages of talking at the beginning. And there is that exciting Baroness nightmare sequence where something happens, plane takes off, someone's sort of kidnapped, there's an explosion. But otherwise, the first half of this issue is just talking. And some of it's dramatic talking, like cleaning up a mission, being at a cemetery, arguing with the boss, father, son, weapons, armament, terrorist guys arguing. But I couldn't help but, particularly with the Colton stuff, I couldn't help but think, man, cut this in half. And then my sort of small comment. So Flint, I think what's starting to happen in this run is the leeway that I'm giving Joe Casey, because he's done all this stuff before G.I. Joe that I like, and I think he's an interesting, smart writer. And I'm willing to let him do G.I. Joe his own way. I think that leeway is starting to run out because he's starting to do not one or two things sort of differently, but 6 or 7 things. And it's starting to feel too far for me, like not G.I. Joe. So, so Flint is talking at the cemetery and he pours out a bottle of alcohol. And I initially thought, wait, is Flint drinking now? And then I thought, no, Hasbro wouldn't have let that. I think that's that ceremonial act where you pour a bottle out, at a funeral or a cemetery. But that doesn't really feel like G.I. Joe, because no one in G.I. Joe has ever consumed alcohol, right? They've consumed Yojo Cola and grape soda. And on pages 19 and 20, the final panel of 19 and the top panel of 20, Duke on his mission in the jungle, he throws 2 grenades at the same time from one hand. And you would not see that in a Larry Hama G.I. Joe comic. And actually, I don't think you'd see that in a Blaylock or Jurwa G.I. Joe comic. And so there are these moments where it's starting to feel more like a superhero book or an action book that's less specific to the sort of rules and like feelings of G.I. Joe. And, I say that understanding that G.I. Joe has cloning and brain scanners and ninja trances. And yet, yes, for me, throwing 2 grenades with accuracy, right? Maybe that's my problem, that it's like, no, I don't think you can do that. I don't think you could even hold 2 grenades in your hand. So in terms of all the talking, I like the motivations and I like the worry. I like that there's, tension and sort of mistrust or distrust on the Joe team. I like that Destro and Alexander are coming to blows, but I don't like how it's happening, or that all these things are happening sort of slowly and too fast at the same time.
I noticed one very specific thing in issue 5, which was around about page 4, top of page 4. There's a corridor where there's on the tannoy, Stalker to General Colton's office, and in the corridor on the right-hand side, you see the back of someone's head, and they've got a very specific plaster on the back of their neck, and they've got their finger to their ear, or maybe a phone to their
By
ear.
plaster, you mean bandage, right? Band-Aid?
Yeah, a sticking plaster, Band-Aid, yeah. And it's a bit like a Pavlov's gun moment, where it's like so specific, it's like, What's that plaster? What is that plaster there to be? Are we going to see this guy with the plaster again? And it's not. It's just a guy who's got a Band-Aid on the back of his neck.
Yeah.
But for me, that was a real sort of pause moment of like, what's that all about? What's that?
I had something sort of like that in some of these scenes with Stalker Nelson Blake II. Is drawing the piping on Stalker's chest a certain way, but the green, the sort of the center stripe, the green doesn't agree with that piping. And I thought, come on, guys. And that's all I have to say about issue 5. Issue 6 is when on the insides, this is before the cover to 8, or the cover to 8 being previewed on the back cover to 7. Issue 6 is where I wrote, oh, hey, it's the Snake Eyes sword prop that was for sale. Oh, hey, it's the Storm Shadow sword prop that was for sale.
Huh.
They are using that on pages, they are using those on pages 3 and 4.
That's fascinating. There's a weird moment though in that sword fight where the sword fight is concluded with Snake Eyes kind of besting Storm Shadow, but it's a kind of like weird sideways shuffle where he's pointing the sword at the side of Storm Shadow's neck, like almost like a sort of a bizarre sort of anime shuffle in from the side.
Yeah, like a special move. Yeah, it's the top panel of page 5.
I don't think that's that's a bona fide ninja fighting style.
Yeah, it's this whole scene, the dialogue. There is a season 4 episode of G.I. Joe called The Sword. I'm calling it season 4. Everyone else is going to call it series 2, season 2. So this is the second Deke season. These episodes were on in 91, 92. There's an episode where Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow go do ninja stuff, and they're after this fancy sword, and I forget who wrote the episode. I forget if there's someone who'd written Sunbow episodes or if they were new for the Deke show, but there's this definite purposeful whoever wrote this episode or whoever story edited this episode definitely wanted to accentuate the link between Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes, that if you had only been watching the cartoon and buying the toy, you would have noticed that in, is it 88? That's Storm Shadow version 2. That toy he's a Joe, not a Cobra, right? And he has no Cobra symbol on him. And doesn't his file card, the 1988 dossier, it's been rewritten to link the two characters more. Because by this point, Hama's still writing the dossiers, and now he's been writing the comic for 6 years, right? And in 1988, my brother and I were not yet reading the comic. And so we noticed these two things. Oh, Storm Shadow's a good guy. That was cool and weird and cool. Okay, so in this episode, Storm Shadow keeps calling Snake Eyes, quote, my ninja brother. And at the time, I appreciated that the writer was going to some length to acknowledge what the Sunbow episodes hadn't or couldn't yet, that these two characters are linked, which is so much of the Marvel Comics story and backstory. And that was starting to sort of get out everywhere else. But it's also really conspicuous, right? Because the voice actor who does Storm Shadow in this season 4 episode is like doing a voice, right? It's like someone doing a like ninja voice. And there's a lot of talk in that episode of like honor and like ninja heritage, and it's cool, but it's also overdone and forced. So I like that episode. That episode makes me roll my eyes. And I have felt that way here and there when other people have written the Snake Eyes Storm Shadow relationship, right? I felt that way a little bit in G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra when there's like a flashback during their fight, to like them as kids fighting. Right? Am I remembering this correctly? Was this in the first live action movie? Doesn't the camera like zoom in on Snake Eyes' eye or Storm Shadow's eye, and then they're like little kids fighting? It's like, cool, too much. And I think I even remember a little of this in Resolute, the one-off cartoon that was on like So anyway, this scene and in these 4 issues, Joe Casey's take on the Storm Shadow Snake Eyes relationship, it feels like it's part of what I like about Hama's Snake Eyes Storm Shadow relationship. To me, it's sort of written with a light touch, even though it is just like baked in and covered with and oozing like loyalty and love and guilt and danger. But something about how he actually writes it, it's sort of with a light touch. And here it starts to be like, like, I feel your anxiety, brother. How many times have we crossed swords? And then there's this like very cool Stefano Caselli wordless panel of Snake Eyes like jumping to attack. And then a like very cool Stefano Caselli wordless panel of Storm Shadow holding up his sword, I guess deflecting it. And then, another panel, and then there are very few absolutes in this life. We both know this. Each new conflict is a new uncertainty. And it's like, no, Storm Shadow doesn't talk like that. It's like speechifying. It's sort of like, it's conspicuous. Like Storm Shadow knows that he's got to like take on the role of the serious, mystical, deadly, mistrusted, former villain, ninja brother. It's too formal.
Yeah. It ends up just being a bit wooden, a bit over melodramatic, not very sort of organic or feeling kind of real. What how these two characters known each other all of this time, how they would genuinely interact like two human beings.
If this was like the first or second year of G.I. Joe, sure.
So issue 6 continues. Destro, we talked about some of his oddness. He's on his way to deliver these robot Iron Grenadiers to the Chinese, and then we have a sequence of Duke in South America, with this time by Caselli, where he's on a boat with this interesting sort of caricatured characters that he's got there on the boat with him.
I just want to say one more quick thing about 6, which dovetails with something about so in issue 6, page 14. Colton and the president are talking. And I know we saw the president in issue 0, but this again jumped out at me. This is definitely not a Larry Hama G.I. Joe comic, because we've never seen the president in a Larry Hama G.I. Joe comic. Actually, is that right? Do we see JFK for one panel in 150
right.
152? The flashback
to the Joe Colton.
Okay, so
flashback,
but that sort of doesn't count, because that's a flashback. And like in your story, in your movie, in your TV show, in your comic, you decide whether you're sort of always present day and you'll never check in with sort of real people like the president, or if you check in with the president, is it sort of a made up president? Like it's like, isn't there a made up president in Superman 3 or Superman 2? And like the Marvel Cinematic Universe has never shown the president until, this is not a spoiler, until like the first episode of Secret Invasion. And then the Marvel Cinematic Universe gets to decide whether it's like actually the real president that you and I know of in the real world, or like an actor who sort of looks like them, or just some actor who could be like any prototypical. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off on a Hama. It's not just that Hama never did show the president. It's that Hama doesn't have scenes. It's like, what's the closest thing to this? The closest scene to this is it's a Rod Wiggum scene in issue 40 something, where who's injured? Hawk. Someone's in the hospital.
I think it might be General Austin.
Yeah, and Hawk gets promoted, right?
Yep.
Which sort of allows for the 1986 figure, and like that's as much as Hama does. And then there's the Jugglers, which he didn't do a lot, and everyone after him does a lot. Right? G.I. Joe is mostly told in Hama's world from the point of the G.I. Joes. Okay, so that's one. And then another one at the beginning of issue 2, the Joes are in this mini submarine and they bump up against Destro's very cool, very big submarine. And Roadblock has this like James Bond device, this like hand laser, so he can cut a hole in the hull and they can sneak in. But if you are in your bathtub and you have a little Joe mini sub and a giant, like larger mini submarine, and they're both underwater, and you like press them together, if suddenly there's a hole between the two, water is going to flood into the smaller Joe mini sub. And I don't mind that Joe Casey writes this scene, that Roadblock gets to do it. What sticks out at me is that there's no explanation for how they seal the two subs so that water doesn't like at least splash into, much less fill the Joe mini sub and kill them all. And I thought I could really use like one line of dialogue, if not like a Larry Hama, like 4 panels of explanation. It's like, like someone get the someone get the inflatable, like expanding like foam spray to like fill in the seal. Okay, Scarlet. No, it's not Scarlet. She's okay, Shipwreck. Make sure we're steady. Okay, Roadblock. Do you have the laser? Okay, Flint. Hold the so-and-so in place while Roadblock makes the circle cut. It's not like this should have been Larry Hama. It's like I needed a little more from Casey to make this a little more believable. And then another thing like this happened where on pages 16 and 17, in two different scenes, there are a lot of Joes shooting across a distance, not taking cover when they're in a hallway or like in a giant control room. And in that second scene, when some of the Joes confront Destro and Alexander, they do make their way to cover. They like hide behind a thing. But there's also a panel of them like just out in the open shooting. And that's a good way to get shot.
Indeed. I thought that perhaps on this issue, I mentioned it in passing in the intro, that possibly there might be some art assists, maybe from Tim Seeley, on a couple of the sequences, particularly where we've got Scarlet. So where did it strike me the most? It was on this page where Scarlet is fighting against these robots, Iron Grenadiers, to escape, and that middle panel, particularly of Scarlet's face.
Oh yeah, is this where the top of the page says "Forward Torpedo Room"? Oh no, okay, no, it's both of these. Right, I see the one.
Could be both. Yeah, it could be in more than one
You're
place.
You're talking about a wordless page. You're talking about yeah, the first panels are jumping in the air, kicking.
Yeah.
Yes, I noticed that face, and that looked a little bit less like Caselli and a little bit more like someone else. And then yes, I see the same thing 1, 2, 3 pages later. When her eyes are closed and she's gritting her teeth and she's blasting another Iron Grenadier. Maybe this is an issue of time. Maybe, we'd heard from Josh Blaylock when we interviewed him that, there were times where Hasbro would make Devil's Due redraw something. And I think the big example was the cover to issue 3. There may have been smaller things here and there with a panel or two, and that may have been for clarity, or it may have been like, this is too sexy, don't make it so sexy.
More on 7.
My comment is this chapter with Destro versus Alexander and Wraith against Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, and Snake Eyes' sacrifice feels forced. So maybe that's sort of the biggest. I mean, like the overall comments for these 4 issues for me is I'm starting to disconnect from Joe Casey's take on G.I. Joe. These comics are feeling a little rocky, and it really sticks out in this issue because, as you said before, Destro's acting desperate in a way that feels sudden or out of character. The Wraith versus Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow fight feels like it's a little bit of a setup, like, oh, the coolest character and the other coolest character and that new cool character are going to fight, and it's going to be cool. And I don't remember Snake Eyes or Storm Shadow having any particular beef with Wraith. Correct me if I'm wrong.
There has been a fight between Wraith and Snake Eyes before.
Great. Okay. Well, maybe I take this one back. But then also, like, I don't love, if I keep comparing this to Larry Hama's G.I. Joe, I don't love how Larry Hama killed Snake Eyes in issue 213. I think there's a lot about the scene that doesn't grab me, and sort of overall, I think I wish he hadn't done it, but he did some interesting stuff after it. And I thought his reason for doing it was really interesting, right? And it's sort of the like, if I don't, someone else might. And no, I can always tell more stories about him. They will be flashbacks. But here, the sort of the Joes infiltrating this sub feels so, it's just sort of missing some stuff. I don't want to say half-baked or under-considered, because I think those are much harsher than I want to be. But, those 2 things I pointed out before, like sealing the gap between the 2 submarines and then not taking cover during fights. It's like, and then there's this sort of cool fight between Wraith and Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, and then this thing where, like, no, you have to manually seal the breach. It's like, oh, that that sort of came out of nowhere at the end. And oh, Snake Eyes. Oh, okay. Oh, he's dead. Okay.
Yeah, it came a bit out of nowhere and a bit quick in the whole choreography of some of it. It was a little bit confusing, and the things that should be exciting had a tendency to kind of make me feel a little underwhelmed. And some of the sense of space and place is maybe slightly lacking. Like if you think of a submarine, you're thinking of like, very cramped, small, curves, lots of piping, and some of this, it's drawn like it's drawn like it could be in a giant cartoon Cobra temple with lots of high ceilings, wide walls, and square angles, and just the logistics of if there was going to be a breach in a sub, you'd want to be able to easily seal off the breached area and to stop it from getting into the rest of the sub, and you'd obviously have that mechanism to close the doors on the outside, because otherwise you'd get stuck in the room when you're designing these things. So some of these things, it kind of falls a little bit flat.
I do appreciate the attempt that Casey makes, where each scene on the submarine, it's specified where this is. So control room, Jestro's quarters, bow, interior corridor. So he's keeping track of it, and he lets us know where we are. But I feel like, on the second to last page, when it says Jestro's quarters and it says boom, boom, and Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are reacting to this water coming in. And I don't know what we're looking at. They're standing in front of a big oval, and there's water coming in from the top of the panel. And I sort of don't know where in the room they are, what the room is like, sort of how the hole where the water is shaped. And then the next panel, the silhouettes of Shipwreck, Scarlet, and Stalker are looking at this schematic of the submarine, which I appreciate. But again, it's sort of like too much and too little too late. Like, what was that? Hull breach. We got to wrap this up. Turn the page. He's dead. And then, the bottom left panel on this second to last page, where Snake Eyes is grabbing, I think, like the cord of a ceiling fluorescent light housing, while he and Storm Shadow are being pushed along this river of gushing water in this submarine. And, we're seeing like the top of Storm Shadow's head and his hand. It's not a great composition for this panel. And then Snake Eyes grabs this cord. Storm Shadow gets pushed away. Also, in the final panel of the issue, when Storm Shadow calls him Silent Master, again, it feels too formal. Like, I think I missed it may have just been between issue 43 and issue 0, but okay, no one trusts Storm Shadow except for Snake Eyes. And Snake Eyes is the Silent Master, because Master and Apprentice or Master Apprentice 2 or something has sort of established this, and that's cool. But I think this is like, no, they were in Vietnam together. I think this is where he calls him, Snake Eyes, because that's who he is, not like Professor, or like, Your Highness. It's like, no, don't use this title, use his name. So then for the final issue, I have two very specific notes. I find the conversation in the first 2 pages between these 3 red ninjas is confusing. Sort of have a hard time telling who's who. 2 of them definitely have masks and 1 of them doesn't. But when you turn the page, I have a slightly hard time telling sort of who's who and where's where. But on that second to last bottom panel, here's my other example for this episode of where I think Stefano Caselli sometimes doesn't have the strongest panel compositions. I'm not talking about storytelling. I'm talking about just arranging elements within one panel. And this is cutting off that chopper on the top of the panel the way that it is. And also, I don't know who those 4 guys are standing around it. So I feel like this panel needed sort of different quote camera angles. And then sort of getting back to this sort of more general action comics thing, which I think was, Joe Casey's pitch or marching orders, to be fair. But this doesn't feel like G.I. Joe, where page 13, panel 1, It's a very cool panel. It's a very cool drawing. But Duke is doing like a jump. He's like flipping in the air, and he's shooting these two bats while he's in the air, jumping upside down. And it's like, no, what is this? The Matrix? It's like, no, Duke isn't a ninja. And sort of how like these guys who are on this mission with Duke, it's like we're supposed to like them because there's some dialogue in the previous issue, but also they all get killed. And then like Kamakura's reaction feels, I just feel like I feel like the emotions have all been heightened in a way that doesn't feel authentic. Like when someone dies, you're so sad and you're so angry, or one or the other. And, Flint and, Stalker and Colton are arguing with each other, and Roadblock doesn't trust Storm Shadow. And I think it's like, no, this isn't X-Men. This isn't like Chris Claremont's X-Men. It's like, out of the way, psych. Me and Jeannie are walking into town. It's like, how dare you, Wolverine? It's like, Iceman, use your powers to fill in that gap so Wolverine can't walk through the doorway. Snick, snick. That's the last time you ever tell someone to do something against me, Slim. It's like, no. This isn't, like the Joes don't argue. It's sort of like, Gene Roddenberry's rule for Star Trek The Next Generation was that none of the regular recurring characters would have any problems with any of the other recurring characters. And he was not involved in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So the first thing that those producers did was they made, for example, Odo and Quark not like each other, and Cisco and Kira not like each other. And that's instant drama, right? It's one of the great things about that show, and it makes that show really different from TNG. But I guess it turns out I don't have a lot of appetite for Joes distrusting and arguing with each other. And then to have Kamakura so upset and like sad and angry. I know he's younger. I know Snake Eyes means everything to him. But the scene feels like melodrama. And I don't think that's what I'm looking for in G.I. Joe.
I'm going to punch my way to the truth. And I feel like we can't go too far without kind of giving the J. Cordray Award for Scarlet crying in the issue. Probably more deserved than normal.
Yes, maybe.
Because after all, Snake Eyes has died. She's allowed to be upset.
Yes. Also, I don't have 213 in front of me, but maybe that's the comparison. Does anyone tear up in 213 when Larry? Excuse me, not 213. Is it 214 or 215? The issue,
the wordless
issue where they all.
Yeah, there are people that cry. I think Stalker sheds a tear.
Yeah.
Particularly.
But again, to be fair, Joe Casey is not hired to write the Blaylock version of G.I. Joe, the Jurawa version of G.I. Joe, or the Hama version of G.I. Joe. And, Devil's Due, to its credit, had hired Hama to write some stories by this point, and would again. And, in 2006, 5 years in, G.I. Joe is competing with on a very different playing field than it had been at Marvel. And so I think Joe Casey's instincts are all good ones, the ones he brings and the ones that he's given. It's like smaller team, bigger stakes, bigger action, and still.
In terms of plot, let's kind of wrap that up, that we are left on a cliffhanger of Snake Eyes disappearing from this makeshift morgue. There's the mystery. Dun dun dun. Is he alive? Has he walked away? Has someone come and taken him? It's an interesting cliffhanger, but it gives you the sense that probably Snake Eyes isn't going to be left dead for very long.
Yeah. There's a weird thing when you read this issue, because you turn this wouldn't happen in the collection, the trade paperback collections, but when you turn from page 13 to 14 in issue 8, you go from Duke's mission in the South to this one-page ad that has a blue flag that's frayed, and I sort of don't know how to describe this ad. It's a flag, but it's been sort of superimposed over a blown up background detail of some random panel where you see some buildings. And then there's this black triangle that as a compositional graphical element that takes up like the right quarter of the image. And then on the bottom, there's a logo for G.I.Joe Americas Elite. And I feel like this is an ad that someone designed, and when they were 60% done, it got printed, because it sort of reminds me of the cover to Superman 75, the Death of Superman issue from 1992, drawn by Dan Jurgens and Brett Breeding, where Superman's cape is like stuck into a pole sticking out of the ground, some rubble, and there's some sad silhouetted people behind it, and you see some like silhouetted buildings, and it's like the Death of Superman, from that actual issue. So compositionally, it looks a little like that, because the white diagonal sort of looks like a flagpole or like a stick coming out of the ground. But I also feel like this ad wanted some copy at the top, like a soldier falls, ... and things will never be the same again. Joe Casey's just getting started. Read it monthly in, and then on the bottom, G.I. Joe Americas Elite. So I like this ad. I don't understand it, and it doesn't look finished.
Yeah, I think it's meant to be a bit of a teaser trailer for something to come, and then in future ads, it becomes clearer.
Okay.
So I'd say this will be revisited, and then
because
this teaser becomes clearer.
In the letters page of one of these issues, one of the answers is it's like, we're heading to issue 13, and I thought, what is that? And then I remembered, oh, right, issue 13 was like a 25-cent issue or something. I know that's not true, but we'll get there. It's like that was like a big thing or a reset or like an event. Or that was like that sort of the apex of Joe Casey's run. But also this like one sentence in the letters page is like too oblique of a tease. And I thought, This is in issue 7. The letters page is 2 pages. And on the second of them, just above the preview cover for the next issue, issue 8, with the white storm shadow. Next issue, the shocks continue in G.I. Joe Americas Elite number 8. The unbelievable events of this issue are followed with next issue's gruesome theft. A trusted ally returns as a team member leaves. The Joes face a dark, dark future. Plus, Duke's secret mission takes an interesting twist. The countdown to number 13 begins, ... And I thought, this is issue 7. It's like, I think I need a little, like, this isn't like, it's not like it's issue 92. It's like the countdown to 100 begins. Like, because 13 is unlucky, or...
That was the teaser advert, the countdown to 13. They didn't have any text to explain it. And then this letter page is also saying that issue 8 has a gruesome theft. So it's kind of a spoiler. It's explaining that the disappearance of Snake Eyes is actually a gruesome theft.
Right.
There we go. So a bit more of a clue as to what's going on. One of my highlights from these 4 issues was actually a letter in issue 8 from Jeremy Newton, who seemed to sum up kind of what was going on quite well. He says, "Dear Joes, looking back on the series so far, it seems to be the common theme of the book has been loyalty." And I've seen that discussed before, that a big theme of G.I. Joe is loyalty. Joe's loyalty to one another, etc. Cobra, disloyalty. Anyway, Storm Shadow's loyalty has been questioned, but it seems to lie with Snake Eyes. Duke's loyalty is apparently with Hawk. Stalker seems to be loyal to Snake Eyes and Scarlet. The interesting thing is that no one seems to be especially loyal to Colton. Consequently, Colton does not seem to trust his own team either. Flint and Storm Shadow seem to be loose cannons, and Duke, Snake Eyes, and Scarlet have been absent for extended amounts of time. Colton almost seems powerless, despite being the leader of the team. I thought, just an interesting, insightful discussion of some of the dynamics of the team.
something nice, something interesting happens in the letters page of issue 7. That there's a letter from Thomas Wheeler, who slightly famously wrote a letter to every month during the Marvel run and had several published, and I think gets called out in the letters page of the final issue, and has shown up once or twice before in the Devil's Due letters pages. And issue 7 in the letters page has a full data disk profile of a real life person, Joseph Bottler, whose codename is Biggest Fan. The copy on the bottom of the previous page says, "Remember last summer's Biggest Fan contest? After many, many submissions and a lot of debate here in the office, we finally arrived at our lucky winner, Joe Bottler of Reno, Nevada." And so there's this, there's a photo of him that looks like it's been blown up and maybe slightly run through the Photoshop watercolor filter, of him in a blue purple martial arts uniform, kicking. And there's a headshot on the left with his file name and his specialties, and then on the bottom under the full figure photo of him, there's a photo of him and his 3 sons in front of many, many martial arts awards. And there's this profile of this real life person, a G.I. Joe fan, who submitted himself to this contest, which I had forgotten about. And so they do a slight biography of him in this profile, but also weave it into the G.I. Joe story, where the third paragraph starts with, "During this time, reports of G.I. Joe exploits encouraged Bottler," and then like he's brought onto the team basically. And so it's this sort of real world, sort of G.I. Joe fantasy combination, and it's cool.
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
I had an error detected. Should we quickly talk about
I
that?
have 2. And then I also wanted to point out, in issue 7, there's a full page ad for a magazine called Lowe Comics and Entertainment. And the bottom shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 covers, which makes me think this magazine had been around for a while or was going to be around for a while. And the bottom of the ad, it's sort of a, there's a cool drawing that looks like it's drawn by Udon, and it looks like it could be a fighting game based on an anime property that I don't know. But what's striking to me about the ad is that the very top of it says Devil's Due Publishing presents. But then on the bottom, it says your #1 source for indie comics and entertainment, lofimagazine.com. And it's published by Urban Robot. And this is not something that I've heard of or seen at comic stores or in back issue bins, but I just wanted to say I've always been interested when reading old comics in what else is going on at that time. You know, if I'm reading an issue of G.I. Joe, I sort of wonder, what was happening this month in Transformers? Or what was happening this month in X-Men? Or I love reading the Marvel Bullpen's Bulletins page where Jim Shooter or Stan Lee, talks about like convention season, or like, there's going to be a new Incredible Hulk TV movie or something like that. And particularly in the 90s and 2000s, some of it is like Wizard Magazine, Hero Illustrated, and the other magazines that tried to be like Wizard that didn't stick around. And I think Lo-Fi, I don't think it lasted more than 4 issues, but I'm intrigued by it because Devil's Due seems somehow involved. Like maybe they helped package it, or maybe they published it, and maybe Urban Robot Publications is Devil's Due, and also because cover to issue Volume 2, number 1, has a drawing of Snake Eyes on it. And this is published October 2005. And then the cover to Volume 2, issue 3 has Black Harvest, which is, I think, something else that Devil's Due was publishing. So I don't know anything more about this, but I'm just intrigued by it, sort of for like what else was happening.
So Error Detected was for me in issue 6, which was the alternating parting of the hair for the president, which I think what they did was they took a stat of the first panel that he was in, copied it into the third panel, and to just mix it up a little bit, they flipped it, but that also meant that his parting flipped at the same time.
That was also one of my two error detecteds. Yes. The other one is that same issue, page 15. Within a word, the letter I is spelled both without serifs and also with serifs. And if you're new to the show and you haven't heard me say this before, a letter or graphic designer told me that the word I, like I and me and mine, the word I in comics should have serifs. But if you're spelling a word like interim or inside or mine, the I should not have serifs. And then I think this happens again in the following issue. And it's pretty nitpicky, but that's how I read my comics.
Yeah, I think I'm done. Should we give it a score?
Joe, cola, not grape soda.
It's Joe-age time.
So I think it's clear. This is, there are things to enjoy in here still. The art is nice. The story is exciting, but not necessarily completely executed in the way that readers of G.I.Joe we would expect or hope. So it was nice to read it back after not having read this for many years. But I think I'm probably in the same place that I read it at the time, which was feeling a little bit disappointed and anxious that perhaps the relaunch wasn't quite going in the direction that I was hoping for. So I don't know. I'll give it a 6.
Yeah, I was thinking something similar, 5 or 6. I guess 6 because it's handsome art and exciting. 5 because it's starting to not be G.I. Joe. So 5.
Okay. So that's just done with America's Elite 5 through 7. Next time on Talking Joe Disavowed, we've got various things in parallel that I think we can be looking at. There is the Zartan story from the back of these books that we've skipped that we'll circle back and have a look at. There's Special Missions Manhattan, which is being advertised in the pages of these issues, which was being published at that time. So we will definitely be taking a look at that. And then we shall also be covering the next few issues of Devil's Due America's Elite. So we'll be covering issues 9 through 12 at some point very soon as well. And doubtless we'll be looking at other bits and pieces G.I. Joe related as well. So all that to come. So Tim, where can people find you when you are not talking to me about G.I. Joe comics?
Video essays from my creative partners and I at our YouTube channel, Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts is Hub Comics. And I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
Excellent stuff. You can find more about Talking Joe at the usual places. TalkingJoe.co.uk is the website that has links to all of those places. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. We're also on Patreon at patreon.com/TalkingJoe. So a big thanks to all our backers: Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Brian, and Shane, who are all getting early access to episodes as well as some exclusive content. And that is us done for now. But remember that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.
But you see, there are two different versions of that jingle. There's the one that starts high, which I was trying to do for Devil's Due, and then there's one that goes high, which I was trying to do for IDW, and I've gotten mixed up a few times.
Right. Okay. Can you do them again just for comparison?
Okay. So this would be for Hama. Nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast. And then Devil's Due is Nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast. This is a big difference. The first couple notes.
Yeah. It's the hammer is a build, and Devil's Due it starts at 11 and continues through at 11. Good stuff.